Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I've got on the screen there a pushcart carrying a patient to Budiriro Polyclinic. This is one of the suburbs in one of Harare, the capital city. Many high density suburbs. That is quite normal now in Zimbabwe. The ambulance service in the cities is unreliable. And where it is available, it's so expensive, the ordinary people cannot afford it. So they've got to make do with what they can. And hiring a pushcart has become normal. What is interesting here is this is happening in a country where those in power and authority insist the country is on course to become an upper middle income nation by 2030, in 6 years time. The truth is, of course, Zimbabwe's economy has been in decline ever since the country's independence in 1980. The first 20 years were characterized by Mugabe boasting that Zimbabwe was going to be a prosperous nation. There was going to be mass prosperity, with Sarojinji, as you would put it. The truth of the matter was, by the end of the first decade, it was clear that the country was heading for trouble. By 1990, the country was going to IMF and the World Bank, begging for loans. And we had what we call the Structural Adjustment Program, ESAP. And the people were told that they needed to tighten their belts. And at the end of the 5-year program, things will be much better. For the ordinary people, of course, they had no choice. The regime started cutting back on some of those activities that benefited the ordinary people, like the healthcare system, these polyclinics used to provide a service to all the people for free. And suddenly people were being told they have to pay for it. Education was supposedly free. Then people started paying for it. And the quality of these services started going down the tube. Even the country's main hospitals have started experiencing hardships. By the end of the first Economic Structure Adjustment Program, 1995, it was clear the economy had not recovered. So the regime went for another 5-year Economic Structure Adjustment Program. Nothing changed. And by then, of course, the economy was in serious trouble. And the regime picked a fight with IMF, blaming them for the economic meltdown and saying they were not going to pay back the loan that they'd got. which prompted the IMF to say, well, okay, we are not going to give you any further loans. I think Mugabe was just looking for a fight, for an excuse not to repay the loans. The truth of the matter is that economic structure adjustment program were never given a chance to work. The agreement was that the regime was supposed to cut some of its excessive spending, particularly on the ruling elite, while the poor are being asked to tighten their belts. The ruling elite were loosening them. Zimbabwe, from the word go, it always had a bloated civil service, a bloated army, a bloated police, a bloated CIO. What for? And of course, all those were meant to help the ruling elite who were given the cushy jobs, the ambassadorial jobs, and so forth and so on. And that was where the real money was being spent. Instead of cutting there, the regime trimmed a few leaves here and there and continued. Zimbabwe's economic meltdown was caused by Mugabe's corruption and mismanagement of the economy. That was at the root of it. The problem with Zimbabwe is we could not remove Zanu PF from office because the regime rigged elections. And by the late 1990s, the people of Zimbabwe came to a realization that as long as Zanu PF remains in power, nothing was going to change. Absolutely nothing. The regime will continue to spend money as if there's no tomorrow. Its idea of economic prosperity through spending was, of course, archaic. Voodoo economics. But the regime, the ruling elite's appetite was unbelievable. The more they got, the more they wanted. The pity, the real tragedy for Zimbabwe, of course, is that the country had the opportunity to end the Zanu PF dictatorship. By the late 1990s, the people of Zimbabwe came to a realization that the only way to end the Zanu PF dictatorship was for the country to elect opposition who will implement democratic reforms to ensure free, fair, and credible elections. And the MDC was launched in 1999 on the back of the people's demand for democratic change. And they even named their party Movement for Democratic Change. But 24 years down the line, alas, they've not implemented even one token reform. Even during the GNU of 2008 to 2013, when they had the golden opportunity to do so. That is the root cause of our problem in Zimbabwe today. We have risked livelihoods, limbs to elect the opposition for the express purpose of implementing reforms to stop Zanu PF rigging the elections. And yet, after 24 years, including the 5 in the GNU, we still are stuck with Zanu PF rigging elections. It is laughable. The buffoon who tells us that Zimbabwe is on course to become an upper middle income nation by 2030 is the one who also has been insisting that Zimbabwe held free, fair, and credible elections. Last year, even the regional body, SADC, and the continental body, AU, condemned those elections as being flawed and illegal. And the buffoon insists they are free, and fair, and credible. The only reason why Mnangagwa got away with it is because MDC have failed to implement any reforms when they had the chance to do so, particularly during the GNU. And ever since, they've been participating in these flawed elections to give Zanu PF legitimacy. The tragedy for Zimbabwe is millions of our people have been so naive and gullible. They've been conned by Chamisa and company to participate in these flawed elections, only to perpetuate Mugabe's and Mnangagwa's Zanu PF rule. The price, this is the price we paid for it. Where even in the urban centers, there is no ambulance service. The polyclinic where the patient is going should be lucky to get a bed or any medication at all. Because even the big hospital, like Parrenyatwa Hospital and Pilo Hospital, the referral hospitals in the country, it is quite common to hear that they have not been able to carry out any operations because they don't have painkillers. Something as simple as painkillers, they don't have. If Parrenyatwa does not have painkillers, one can only imagine how much worse off Budiriro Polyclinic would be. Even worse, those clinics and hospitals in the rural backwaters. Zimbabwe's health system has all but collapsed. Education system have all but collapsed. And for decades too. How anyone can expect that the country can prosper, have any meaningful economic recovery under those conditions beggars belief. But as long as Mnangagwa is able to rig the elections, he will stay in power. As long as he stays in power, corruption and mismanagement will continue. Our hope of stopping this Zanu PF dictatorship is making sure that we have got free, fair, and credible elections. We have got to go back to the drawing board of late 1990s. We've got to look for an opposition leaders who will implement the reforms. To keep on hoping that Chamisa and company will do something is naive, to say the least. They failed to implement even one reform in 24 years, including 5 in the GNU. They've been participating in flawed elections to give Zanu PF legitimacy. To still expect with the we should continue backing them, beggars belief. I have some friends in WhatsApp groups, and the debate has been about, while we must support the opposition, Chamisa and company are our only hope. You say to yourself, this is unbelievable. What has Chamisa done? What has MDC Triple C done in the last 24 years, including 5 in the GNU? Nothing. They had been participating in these flawed elections, lying to the people that they are going to win big because they've plugged all the vote-rigging loopholes. And still some people consider Chamisa and company as the nation's saviors. That's when you realize we are in serious trouble. With an electorate with that kind of mentality, we are not getting out of this mess. The worst thing that can happen in 2028 is for Chamisa and company to convince the people that it's going to win so that they participate again in a flawed electoral process and give Zanu PF legitimacy. And as long as people participate in their millions, I can rest assure you, SADC, even if they wanted to deny Zanu PF political legitimacy, will find it very difficult to do so. The problem is with the electorate. If you haven't understood why the people have been risking livelihoods, limbs, and over 500 lost their lives during the 2008 elections alone to elect the opposition into power, then you really don't deserve to have a vote. But that is where we are. We have got an electorate that by all rights should not have the right to vote because they don't understand what is going on. Of course, it is unfair to con somebody into believing that they're doing the right thing when in fact they're only perpetuating their own suffering. They're just taking advantage of their ignorance, naivety, to perpetuate their own suffering. I can understand the people in the rural areas being conned. What I cannot accept is some of the people in the urban centers. They should know better. People in the diaspora, they should know better. And yet, these are some of the most dedicated Chamisa Chete people you'll find. They will defend Chamisa statement that he had plugged the vote-rigging loopholes. Of course, that was a lie, but they will never accept that he lied. Why? Well, it's to do with that personality cult mentality. But this is the price the nation is paid for this personality cult mentality. Man is supposed to be a creature of reason. What we have seen from some of our Zimbabweans, when you believe, you're conned into believing that Chamisa is plugged all the vote-rigging loopholes, that to me speaks volumes. How can you be so naive How could he be so gullible? But there it is. The greatest fear in Zimbabwe, right, is that we will get into 2028 and history will repeat itself. And what we are seeing here, the suffering of the masses, 49% of ordinary Zimbabweans are living now in abject poverty. That will only get worse. Mnangagwa's promise of upper middle income is just a lie. And I can't say it often enough. This is just a plain lie. And how anyone can be so gullible to believe it is absolutely unbelievable. But a comment there from Tina saying, very, very depressing image to think that there are people who still support Mnangagwa with such an ambulance, even during the white regime. Well, I totally agree. There are many people who believe in Mnangagwa promise that he will deliver economic prosperity and Zimbabwe will become an upper middle income nation in 6 months, 6 years' time. It is unbelievable, but they are there. But I also would want to emphasize here that Mnangagwa rigged the elections last year. And therefore, then per se, we cannot say they were people who, or rather the majority, who freely elected him. If elections were rigged, per se, Mnangagwa does not have the mandate of the people to govern the country. My main criticism is that the opposition participated in those elections, knowing fully well that the elections were going to be rigged, knowing fully well that by participating, they will give Zanu PF legitimacy. But they did out of greed. And worse still, they conned ordinary Zimbabweans, taking advantage of their ignorance and naivety to make them believe that the opposition was going to win, so that they participated in turn in their millions. I think that is my bone of contention. If Zimbabweans had not participated in those elections, I honestly believe that SADC would have denied Mnangagwa legitimacy. Another comment here from Gloat. Mr. Mkori, although I differ with you sharply on some of your views, I very much love your analytic mind. You are thorough and strongly penetrating as an observer. Thank you very much. I think one of the tragedies in Zimbabwe is that we have not allowed any meaningful political discourse. And that's one of the reasons why we are in this mess. Our politics has been deliberately twisted so that if you criticize Zanu PF, you're immediately labeled a puppet of the West. And no serious consideration is given to the views you have expressed. And unfortunately, there have been those diehards Zanu PF supporters who would not even consider what you have said. I think one of the results of that is, of course, when we're talking about free, fair, and credible elections here. Each time you said we want free, fair, and credible elections, Zanu PF will dismiss you as that is a demand from the whites, as if Zimbabweans ourselves were incapable or we don't deserve free, fair, and credible elections. We don't deserve to have a meaningful say in the governance of our own country. And yet we are incapable of seeing that elections are being rigged, we are being shortchanged, which is, of course, nonsensical. Before independence, people were fighting for one man, one vote. That is exactly what it meant, that every Zimbabwean must have a meaningful vote. And that has got nothing to do with sanctions, which is another excuse Zanu PF will give you. But on the other hand, you also will find that if you criticize the opposition, they are immediately labeled as Zanu PF project. Even some of us who have said we want free, fair, and credible elections, we want reforms to be implemented so that we have free, fair, and credible elections. You get labeled as a Zanu PF project. Since when is Zanu PF advocated for free, fair, and credible elections? This is how short-sighted these people are. It is a pity that we have stifled debate in Zimbabwe, but we need it now more than ever before. I think, to me, if you want my honest opinion, the worst thing that can possibly happen to Zimbabwe is for us to find ourselves in 2028 going down the same route that we went last year, participating in flawed elections to give Zanu PF political legitimacy. Zanu PF itself will want to do that. And I can tell you now, some of the opposition politicians are so hungry they will participate in these flawed elections. Doesn't matter what they can tell you, you and me now, but as we move nearer the date, you'll be surprised. Mnangagwa knows how to catch our friends in the opposition. And he is relentless in that regard. He will be fishing for them to participate in these flawed elections. And I believe, as he did after 2018, he created Pollard for no other reason than to entice the opposition to participate. If he sees that there is any movement to pressure this issue of we want reforms before elections, I think we will see Zanu PF increase the price for participating, make it very attractive for people to participate. That is what Zanu PF would want to do. And one way of doing it is, of course, to increase the benefits of those who do participate. During the GNU, during 2018, he created Pollard. And we all know that those who participated in Pollard did get the benefits. They were given cars. There was talk of them getting diplomatic passports. And that increased the scramble to participate. Mnangagwa had to come up with an idea of trying to limit the number of people who will be contesting the presidential. And that 20,000 US dollars nomination fee was a deliberate act to reduce the scramble for those who would have participated for no other reason than so that they could become members of the Pollard and get free cars, diplomatic passports, and many other fringe benefits. In the end, only 9 people contested the presidential. But we know that there were some whom we can honestly say the spirit was willing, but the finance was weak. And many of those are still hoping that Mnangagwa will somehow revive the Pollard so that they could recover something from their 20,000 deposit. That is the kind of people we are dealing with. And as for the MPs and senators and councillors and so forth, as we can see in that cartoon, the scramble for those few gravy train seats is as honest and as serious as it is within Zanu PF itself. Mnangagwa knows that as long as there is these gravy train seats, a few of them to be won, there will be a scramble to participate. Forget about the process being flawed and illegal. He doesn't care about that. And these guys do not care about it either. They are after the few gravy train seats that are available. And that is all they care about. I think it is, the challenge really is more the ordinary Zimbabweans to open their eyes and their minds and see how the opposition is no longer fighting in the ordinary people's corner. And this is where I've got my beef with many ordinary Zimbabweans there, particularly those in the urban centers and those in the diaspora. How anyone can still be conned by Chamisa, blatant, in this day and age, beggars belief. And yet, many out there were conned. And even now, with the benefit of hindsight, they will never admit that Chamisa lied to them. I find that unbelievable. But that's where we are. The fight is really to stop people participating in 2028 elections without reforms and give Zanu PF legitimacy. That is where the fight has got to be. As long as Zanu PF is able to rig the elections, the poverty, the abject poverty that we see in Zimbabwe today will only get worse. The looting is out of this world now. When you hear that 80% of Zimbabwe's gold is being smuggled, that's when you realize how serious our problem is. 80% is benefiting the few. And that those who are benefiting, they're able to use some of the looted wealth to bribe officials, from chiefs to church leaders to magistrates, judges, ministers, MPs, senators, and so forth. Mnangagwa spent a cool $5 billion in last year's elections alone. Where did he get the money from? From the looting, of course. He's the godfather of the looting that is taking place. And as long as he can entice the opposition to keep on participating and the benefits are given to those opposition who will entice in turn the people to participate in their millions. This is why Mnangagwa is very happy with Chamisa's work. That is where the benefit is coming from. Chamisa will be going all out again to make sure that people participate. Our job is to make sure that people realize they're being used and stop this madness. It's going to be a serious challenge, but I think people can do it if they really put their minds to it. Thank you very much for joining me today, and I hope you'll do so again tomorrow, same time, 7 o'clock UK time or 8 o'clock